Today is your sister Paige's birthday. We cannot come. My mother Elaine said it 3 hours after I told her the truth. My husband Nathan was gone, and my 2 children were gone. There were 7 seconds of silence on the phone, then she hung up. I stood in a hospital hallway, still wearing the scrubs I started my shift in. The world did not spin. It simply stopped. Nathan, my daughter Grace, my son Owen, all gone. And my mother chose a birthday cake over 3 caskets. That phone call did not break me. It freed me. Because 6 months later, one local headline about what I did next sent my whole family into a panic. They do not know it yet. Skipping that funeral cost them more than access to me. It cost them the story they lived on and the safety of their reputation. My name is Emily Foster. I am 34 years old. I work as an emergency room nurse in Hartford, Connecticut. Let me take you back to a night in November, the night I lost everything. Before that night, my life was small and good, not flashy, just steady. Nathan and I lived in a 3-bedroom colonial in Farmington, not far from the highway. He wrote software at a mid-size firm in Glastonbury. I worked nights at Mercy General, and we traded sleepy kisses in doorways. We bought the house 2 years earlier, with a modest down payment and a stubborn kind of hope. Grace was 6, with Nathan brown eyes and my hard-headed focus. Owen was 4, and he carried a stuffed bear named Captain Everywhere. The grocery store, the bathtub, even church on Sundays. I used to complain about the bear, then laugh, then take pictures anyway. Nathan would grin and say, "Let him be little." We met in my emergency room, on a night shift that felt endless. Nathan sliced his hand helping a coworker move a desk. He walked in holding a dish towel, bleeding through it, and asked if the stitches would make him look cool. I rolled my eyes, and I smiled, and I did not know he would become my whole home. In the Foster family, I was the invisible one, the oldest daughter who never needed. I paid my way through nursing school, working double shifts, then studying. I planned my own wedding, a small courthouse ceremony with cheap flowers. Elaine said there was no budget for anything bigger, and she sounded sorry. That same year, Paige got a sweet 16 party. It had 70 guests, and a disc jockey, and matching dresses. Harold smiled in every photo, like generosity was his personal hobby. Every holiday followed the same script. I cooked, I cleaned, I shopped. Elaine called to ask what I was bringing, never how I was holding up. She never asked whether Grace liked school or whether Owen still feared storms. She asked about casserole and napkins and who would carve the turkey. Nathan saw it before I did, because he was not trained to excuse it. One Thanksgiving, I spent 9 hours in Elaine's kitchen, then carried dishes. Nathan loaded the car with leftovers and watched my hands tremble. He told me my family treated me like staff, and he sounded sad. I defended them, because I always defended them. I said they were just like that. Nathan did not argue. He only watched. And he remembered. He remembered Paige opening gifts first, while Grace and Owen waited quietly. He remembered Harold praising Trent, Paige's boyfriend, for bringing wine. He remembered Elaine correcting my parenting in public, then laughing it off. I kept hoping motherhood would soften them and make them kinder. Instead, my children became props for photos, then background noise. The only time Elaine sounded proud of me was when strangers were listening. When it was only us, she acted like my life was inconvenient. Nathan started planning for the day I would stop chasing them. He did it quietly, like he did everything important. I did not know that yet. I only knew we were busy and tired. Then came Tuesday, November 14th, and my body learned grief by force. I was halfway through my shift at Mercy General when the charge nurse touched my shoulder. Her voice was careful and controlled, the voice we use for disaster. 2 Connecticut state troopers waited in the break room, one holding his hat. The other could not meet my eyes, and that told me everything. They said there was a crash on Route 44, near the last light. Nathan had picked Grace and Owen up from swim lessons at the community center. They were minutes from home, and it should have been ordinary. The other driver ran the red light, and the trooper said he was drunk. The impact hit the passenger side hard, and nothing after that was normal. Nathan died at the scene, and Grace died on the way in the ambulance. Owen was brought to my hospital, while I stood trapped behind a door. The trooper said there were 3 minutes between the call and the end. I remember the floor and the buzzing lights, more than my own breathing. Later, I pulled out my phone, hands shaking so badly I could not focus. I called my mother, because instinct says call your mother when everything breaks. The phone rang 4 times, and I heard music and laughter behind it. Paige's voice rose over the noise, singing off key. Then Elaine answered. She said, "Hello, Emily. Make it quick. We are about to cut cake." I said, "Nathan is dead. Grace is dead. Owen is dead. I need you." There was silence, long enough to hurt, and the party sounds kept going. Elaine lowered her voice, like grief was rude to guests. She said, "Today's Paige's birthday. We have 30 people here. We cannot leave." I pressed the phone harder against my ear. Sure, I misheard. Elaine told me to call a friend from the hospital, and she would call tomorrow. Then she ended the call, and I stared at the log until my eyes burned. I called Harold next, and he stepped outside, wind loud on the line. He said, "Elaine told me, we will see you next week. Hang on." He ended the call too. I called Paige and got voicemail, and she texted later, saying sorry. Call tomorrow. 3 calls, 3 chances, 3 doors slammed shut. The funeral was on Saturday, November 18th, and rain fell without apology. A pastor from our church presided, steady and kind, and she asked what they loved. Grace loved butterflies and glitter pens. Owen loved his bear captain. Nathan loved old songs, the kind that make you drive slower. Under a tent by the cemetery, I stood in front of 3 caskets. 1 was full-sized, 2 were impossibly small, and I could not accept it. My co-workers came in black coats over their scrubs, straight from a shift. A friend of Nathan flew in overnight and held an umbrella over my head. I placed Captain beside Owen and a butterfly clip beside Grace. I touched Nathan's hand one last time, and I whispered goodbye. Then I looked at the front row, the chairs reserved for my family. 4 white folding chairs sat empty, filling with rainwater. Not one Foster, not Elaine, not Harold, not Paige, not even Trent. The pastor saw my gaze and squeezed my wrist, and she did not need words. After the burial, Nathan's friend asked where my family was, and I could only shake my head. A week later, Elaine called, and my thumb answered before my mind did. Her voice sounded warm and reasonable, like she was checking on me. She asked about Thanksgiving next week, and asked what casserole I would bring. She said, Paige wanted the green bean one. Like my grief was a scheduling problem. I held the phone away from my ear, and stared at it, waiting for sense. I told her I just buried my family, and I was not bringing anything. Elaine said that was exactly why I needed people, and sitting alone was not healthy. I heard the machinery under her kindness. Come serve, come perform. Make this tragedy convenient. I told her I could not do that. Not now. Not ever again. Elaine told me to stop being dramatic, and said they were my family. I ended the call. No argument. No explanation. And my hands shook afterward. Elaine called back 4 times, and I let it ring. She left a voicemail saying I could not shut people out. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the empty house, and I realized something new. The worst night of my life did not confuse them, it revealed them. I stood in my kitchen, and the house felt like a museum. Nathan's coffee mug sat by the sink, still unwashed. Grace's drawing of a purple horse stayed on the refrigerator. Owen Booster's seat still touched the table, like he would climb in any second. Elaine's voicemail played again, and she said I could not shut people out. My hands shook, but my mind was clear. If I went back to that Thanksgiving table, I would never escape it. I would serve people who did not show up when my world collapsed. So I typed one message into the family group chat, plain and steady. I need space. Please do not contact me. I will reach out when I am ready. Then I set the phone down and waited for the storm. Elaine answered in under 2 minutes. She wrote that this was unacceptable and that I did not get to disappear. Harold followed, telling me my mother was upset and I should call her. Paige waited an hour, then wrote that she guessed she did not have a sister anymore. I read the words once, and my chest went quiet. I blocked Elaine, I blocked Harold, and I blocked Paige. I muted the group chat, and the silence settled around me, soft and heavy like snow. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the empty house breathe. In the morning, I called a therapist, because grief is not something you outrun. Dr. Mariah Shaw had an office in Hartford, on a street lined with old brick buildings. The waiting room smelled like tea, and the chairs were worn from other stories. In our first session, she asked a question that knocked the air from me. When was the last time your family showed up for you? I opened my mouth, then closed it, and the answer was silence. Dr. Mariah Shaw did not rush me, and she did not offer cheap comfort. She asked me to name what I needed, not what my family demanded. I told her I needed quiet, and I needed my life to stop shaking. She nodded and said we would start with boundaries and practice holding them. In the next session, she asked again, when did Elaine show up for you? I thought about birthdays, graduations, and the day I became a nurse. I thought about Nathan and the kids, and every time I begged for simple support, the answer sat in my throat like a stone, and it was still nothing. A week later, I went back to Mercy General, because routine is a lifeline. My coworkers covered for me without asking questions. Angela swapped shifts, Marcus handled my charts, and Dr. Patel kept me on lower acuity cases. I moved through the department like a ghost, smiling when I had to, breathing when I remembered. Then one night, a drunk driving victim came in, 19 years old, pelvis shattered, blood everywhere. I finished my tasks, then I made it to the supply closet, and my knees finally gave out. I slid down the wall, and I cried into my sleeve, silent and shaking. When I came out, nobody stared. They only handed me water and kept moving. Later that week, a local reporter named Tom Whitfield called my phone. He had been at the funeral, standing back with kind eyes, and a notebook he did not wave around. He asked how I was doing, really. I told him I was surviving, and that was enough for now. Tom paused, then said Nathan Lawyer had called him and wanted to reach me. The lawyer name was Robert Calloway, and he said there was paperwork Nathan filed months earlier. I told Tom I did not know Nathan had a lawyer at all. My stomach tightened, because surprises had become dangerous. Tom gave me the office number, and I wrote it down with a trembling hand. Robert Calloway office was on the second floor of a brick building in West Hartford, above a bakery that smelled like sourdough. The stairwell felt warm, and I remember thinking it was unfair. I had not felt warm in months. Robert was tall, in his mid-50s, with reading glasses and a handshake that felt steady. He told me he and Nathan went to college together, and they stayed in touch. He said Nathan came to see him 8 months before the crash, and they talked about planning. Around that same time, Nathan started locking his home office door on Sunday evenings. I assumed he was working, and I never pushed. Robert slid at a manila envelope across his desk, and his voice stayed gentle. Nathan bought a term life insurance policy 8 months before the accident, $5 million. You are the only beneficiary, and the claim is approved. Because the policy was under 2 years old, the carrier did a routine review, and it took about 4 months. Nathan was healthy. He did not drink. He did not smoke, and the crash was not his fault. Robert said the funds were ready to be released. I stared at him, and the number did not register at first. $5 million sounded like a foreign language, too large to hold. Robert watched my face, then added the reason Nathan did it. Nathan told me you would be alone, he said, and that your family would not help. He wanted certainty, that you would be covered. There was a letter inside the envelope, in Nathan handwriting, the slanted script I used to tease him about. I could not read it there, not in that office, not in front of a stranger. Robert told me the final line, because Nathan asked him to if I hesitated. It said I always take care of everyone else, and he wanted to take care of me one last time. I pressed the envelope to my chest, and I cried, not the hollow shock from the hospital floor. This crying was warm, and it was grief mixed with love. Nathan could not save himself, but he reached across death to hold me. I drove home from Robert Calloway's office, with the envelope on my lap, like it was glass. I waited until I was inside my empty house. Then, I sat at the kitchen table. I opened Nathan's letter slowly, and I read it twice, then a third time. He wrote about Grace Laugh, and Owen Bear Captain, and the way I carried everyone. He wrote that I would want to be strong, and that I should not confuse strength with silence. He wrote that money could not replace them, but it could keep me from drowning. Then he wrote the line that broke me clean. He said my family would come for me, only when they wanted something. Nathan was right about so many things, even after he was gone. That night, I did not sleep. I listened to the furnace click on and off, and I thought about Elaine's voice at that birthday party. I thought about Harold saying next week, like funerals can wait. I thought about Paige's text, saying call tomorrow, like death had office hours. If they could skip a funeral, they could skip me forever, and only return for cash. So I made a quiet decision, and I made it early. I would not tell them about the policy, not a word. I would not buy their love with a number, and I would not let them use Nathan's last act of care. I met with Robert again, and I asked how to protect the money, and how to protect myself. He explained trusts, and privacy, and safe steps. He said I should take time before making big choices. I told him I was not looking for a new life. I was trying to keep breathing. I paid off the mortgage, because I needed a roof that could not be threatened. I kept working my hospital shifts, because routine held me up. And when the loneliness hit like a wave, I did not call Elaine. I called Dr. Mariah Shaw. Every time guilt tried to rise, I read Nathan's letter again, and I remembered. People who do not show up in grief do not deserve a reward later. The first months after the money arrived, I moved carefully, like one wrong step would shatter me. I did not buy a new car, and I did not change my name. I hired a financial planner, and I sat through meetings with a notebook in my lap. We talked about conservative investments and emergency reserves and long-term safety. Nathan gave me a life raft, and I refused to poke holes in it. Still, I could not stop thinking about the drunk driver and the chain of people he destroyed. At Mercy General, I kept seeing families in the same hallway I stood in. I saw the same blank faces, the same shaking hands, the same stunned quiet. One night a woman my age came in, because her brother was killed by a drunk driver. She kept asking for a redo, like time could be negotiated. I held her shoulder, and I told her the truth I hated. There is no redo, only the next breath. When she left, I sat in my car and cried, because I realized I could not save Nathan, Grace, or Owen. But maybe I could soften the impact for someone else, when their world broke. That's how the idea formed, slow and stubborn. With Robert's help, I set up a small charity fund in my family name. It helped families hit by drunk driving, with immediate costs that crush you in the first weeks. Funeral bills, rent for a few months, childcare help, and therapy referrals. Not luxuries, just survival. I kept it local at first, because I needed to see faces and know it mattered. I met with a counselor who specializes in traumatic loss, and I offered to cover sessions for parents who could not afford them. I wrote a simple mission statement, and I made one rule. No speeches, no publicity stunts, no using grief as a stage. This was about dignity, and about keeping people from falling through crack. Each time I approved a small grant, I felt pain and purpose in the same breath. It did not heal me, but it gave my grief a direction. I tried to keep the fund quiet, but quiet work still leaves a trail. Families talk, nurses talk, and someone told Tom Whitfield my name. He called with a careful voice and asked for a short interview. I almost refused, because attention felt like a threat. Dr. Mariah Shaw asked what I feared most, and I said my parents. I said Elaine would take my grief and sell it as a story. Tom promised he would focus on the families we helped, not on spectacle. We met at a small diner near the hospital, and I kept my hands wrapped around coffee. I told him about Nathan, Grace, and Owen without chasing details that cut. I told him the fund covered rent for a few months when life collapses. I told him it covered therapy referrals and funeral costs when needed. Tom listened more than he spoke, and that mattered. When the article came out, it was gentle and it was honest. He wrote about my work in the emergency room and my husband's steady kindness. Near the end, he included one plain sentence about the funeral chairs. He wrote that the front row for my family of origin was empty. He did not name Elaine, Harold, or Paige, and he did not add opinion. Still, truth has weight, and it landed hard in our town. 2 days later, my blocked phone lit up with unknown numbers. Elaine left a voicemail from a new line, voice sweet and frantic. She said the article made the family look terrible, and I must correct it. Harold sent an email about reputation, and church friends asking questions. Paige messaged that people were gossiping, and she felt attacked unfairly. Not one of them asked how I was sleeping, or whether I ate. They only asked for damage control, like my grief was their mess to manage. I forwarded the messages to Robert Calloway and asked for a formal no-contact letter. Then I went to work and took care of strangers because that is what I do. A week later, I finished a shift and found a note on my windshield. It was from Elaine, written in tidy handwriting, full of soft words. She said the church wanted to pray with me and bring healing. She said Harold and Paige would be there, and it would be private. I knew it would not be private, because my mother never wastes an audience. I told Robert, and he advised me to avoid contact, but I also wanted closure. So I went, on my terms, in the middle of a weekday afternoon. The church hall was bright, and chairs were arranged in a circle. Elaine sat in front, already crying, already performing. Harold stood behind her, arms crossed, looking stern and injured. Paige sat with a tissue box in her lap, like she planned to be seen. A few church friends hovered nearby, pretending to give space, while listening. Elaine reached for my hands, and I stepped back calmly. She said she wanted forgiveness, and she wanted the family whole again. Harold said we all make mistakes, and I should stop punishing them. Paige said she missed me, then glanced at the women watching. I asked one question, and the room went still. I asked why none of you came to the hospital, or the funeral. Elaine started talking fast, blaming shock, blaming timing, blaming Paige's birthday. Harold said he thought Elaine handled it, and he trusted her judgment. Paige said she was overwhelmed and did not know what to do. I nodded once, and I said the truth in a steady voice. You chose cake over my children, and you chose comfort over my husband. I said I will not rewrite that, to protect your image. Elaine cried louder, and Harold frowned deeper, like volume proves innocence. I told them I hope they find peace, but they will not find it through me. Then I walked out, and I did not look back at the circle. After the church, the messages got worse, not better. Elaine sent letters to my mailbox, full of soft blame and demands. Harold called the hospital main line, asking what shifts I worked, like control was his right. Paige tried to contact coworkers through social media, pretending concern. I stopped waiting for them to respect a boundary, and I made it enforceable. Robert Calloway drafted a no-contact letter, clear and strict, and he sent it certified. It stated they must stop calling, emailing, visiting, or contacting my workplace. It stated any further harassment would be documented and handled legally. Elaine responded with a handwritten note about family and forgiveness, still refusing accountability. Harold responded with silence, which is how he always protects himself. Paige sent one last message that said I was heartless. Then she deleted it. I changed my phone number, and I gave the new one to only a few people. I informed hospital security, and I gave them photos and names. I kept the fund running quietly, and I expanded the list of therapists we could cover. Each time I approved a grant, I felt Nathan beside me for a breath. I still missed Grace laugh and Owen bear Captain on the couch. I still missed Nathan's voice in the hallway, telling me I was doing great. But I was no longer begging my parents to be decent, and that freed a part of me. They can keep their excuses, and their staged prayers, and their gossip. I kept the truth, and I kept the peace, and I kept my life. Robert Calloway mailed the no-contact letters on Monday, certified and clear. 3 copies, 3 addresses, 1 boundary put into paper. Elaine called his office 2 days later, and her voice carried through reception. She said a daughter cannot send threats to her own mother. She said grief made me irrational. Robert kept his tone steady and repeated the same sentence twice. The terms are clear. Please respect them. Further contact will be documented. Elaine snapped that I was being manipulated by money and by outsiders. Robert ended the call politely, and Elaine did what she always does. She looked for an audience, because an audience is her favorite weapon. Within a week, she wrote a handwritten letter on cream-colored stationery. She mailed copies to women from church, the ones who gossip softly. She described a daughter lost to grief and a mother desperate to save her. She asked them to pray, and she asked them to intervene, gently, of course. One copy reached our pastor, Pastor Renee Caldwell, the woman who stood in rain. Pastor Renee read the letter slowly, then she called Elaine that evening. Pastor Renee's voice was calm, but it carried weight, like a closing door. She said I was at the funeral. Elaine, I saw the empty family chairs. She said I will not pass this letter around, and I will not pressure Emily. There was a long silence. Then Elaine hung up, hard and offended. Later, Pastor Renee called me, and she sounded tired but honest. She said your mother is not stopping, but the truth is not stopping either. I thanked her, and I sat at my kitchen table alone. I looked at Nathan's mug by the sink, still unwashed on purpose. I realized the old rule was broken. Their story would not run my life. Just past the 1-year mark, the Foster Family Foundation held its first gala. We booked a bright room at the Pond House in Elizabeth Park. The windows faced the gardens, and the light felt clean and real. About 150 guests filled the tables, nurses and neighbors. Families we helped sat in the front, people I recognized by grief. Tom Whitfield came with a photographer, and he stayed respectful and quiet. Pastor Renee gave a short opening about presence and proof, not speeches. When it was my turn, I walked to the podium and gripped the edge. Behind me, a screen showed 3 photographs. Nathan smiling in a hoodie. Grace on her first day of school, missing a tooth and proud. Owen at the beach, holding Captain the bear under one arm. I spoke slowly, and I kept my sentences steady, like steps. I said Nathan believed in preparing for the worst, so love could survive it. I said because of him, families did not face eviction after funerals. I said children stayed in therapy, and parents stayed housed through the first shock. People stood and clapped, and I felt the room hold me up. When the applause faded, I stepped down and reached for a glass of water. That is when I saw them, near the back, half hidden by a pillar. Elaine and Paige, sitting in the last row, not invited, not expected. Elaine wore her soft lavender dress again, like armor made of fabric. She waited until I was alone near the dessert table, then crossed the room. She looked up at me with wet eyes, practiced and shining, and said, "I am so proud of you." 4 words I waited my whole life to hear, delivered under camera lights. I said thank you for coming, polite and distant, like a stranger at work. Elaine flinched, then whispered, "Can we talk somewhere private?" I said there is nothing private left to discuss, not after what you chose. Paige stepped in and said we showed up, like showing up late erases the missing. I looked at her and said, 1 year late, Paige, and you know that. Robert appeared at my side, calm and perfectly timed, and asked for my attention. I nodded, excused myself, and walked away without looking back. The fallout did not come as screaming, it came as distance and silence. Elaine expected to be welcomed back into every room, and she was not. 2 weeks after the gala, the church office called her about leadership changes. Her co-chair role was being rotated to fresh voices after many years. They thanked her for service, and the subtext said, "We remember." Elaine stopped staying after sermons, then she stopped attending at all. Nobody chased her, nobody begged her to return, and that was new. Paige disappeared from social media for a while, because comments were sharp. Harold retreated into quiet, the same way he always avoided accountability. He began sending short texts sometimes, never demanding, only thinking of you. I read them, and I did not answer yet, but I did not block him again. That is the only opening I left, because his silence was not as loud. Dr. Mariah Shaw told me I was not who I used to be, and she was right. I stopped apologizing for boundaries, and I stopped performing for people. I stopped cooking for those who skipped my worst day, then begged later. Grief still lives in my house, but it no longer runs my choices. Nathan showed up every day he had, and my coworkers showed up in black coats. Pastor Renee showed up, and Tom showed up, and strangers showed up through the foundation. That is what love looks like. It arrives, it stays. It does not bargain. If someone treats your worst day like an inconvenience, you have every right. You can build a life without them in it, and call it peace. After the gala, Elaine did not stop. She only changed her costume. She sent a handwritten note to my mailbox. She asked for a meeting and said she wanted to heal. She suggested a coffee shop near the church, and she signed it with love. I did not answer, but she showed up anyway, because that is what she does. She waited by my car after a night shift. She held a paper bag and smiled too wide. Harold stood a few steps behind her, hands in his pockets. He pretended he was not part of it. Paige was there too, wearing a black coat and looking at her phone like a shield. Elaine said she was sorry, and she said it fast, before I could speak. I asked what she was sorry for, and she blinked, then started circling. She said she was sorry. Things got complicated, and sorry I felt unsupported. She said she was sorry the article hurt the family, and that people were judging. I told her my pain did not begin with an article. It began in that hospital hallway. Paige cut in and said everyone makes mistakes, and I should stop punishing them. Harold finally spoke and said we should talk inside, like he was granting me a favor. I said no, and I kept my voice calm, because calm is power. Elaine lifted the paper bag and said she brought muffins, as if sugar could erase absence. Then she leaned closer and whispered the real reason. She said the foundation is getting attention. She said people assume the family is involved. She said it would look better if we stood together. She said Harold could handle the finances and Paige could help with events. I stared at her, and I felt cold clarity, because there it was. She did not want my forgiveness. She wanted my platform and my money. I told her the foundation is for families hit by drunk driving, not for your image. I told her to leave my workplace alone, and to leave my home alone. If she refuses, Robert will escalate. Paige scoffed, and Elaine cried softly, but they stepped back. They heard the word lawyer, and they finally respected distance. I got into my car, and I drove away, and my hands did not shake. 2 days later, Harold asked to meet alone, and I agreed to a public place. We sat in a corner booth at a diner in Hartford, under a humming light. He looked older than I remembered, and his hands shook when he held coffee. He said he did not sleep after the article. He said he kept seeing the empty chairs. I waited, because Harold always speaks last, and only when pressured. He said he was sorry, and for a moment I believed he meant it. Then he added that Elaine has been suffering, and Paige has been getting attacked. He said the church women are cold, and the neighborhood whispers are cruel. The apology turned into a complaint, and I felt the familiar pivot. I told him grief does not make you a victim, absence does. Harold stared at the table and said he did not know what to do that night. He said Elaine told him it was Paige's birthday, and he followed her lead. I asked him why he followed, when my children were dying. Harold flinched and said he thought I had coworkers and I would be fine. The sentence hit like a slap because it was so small and selfish. I told him I was not fine. I was burying my whole life. Harold wiped his mouth with a napkin and said he wants to fix it now. I asked him how, and he said I should tell people they did not understand. He said I should post a statement and say the family was in shock. He said the foundation should include the foster name in a positive way. I looked at him and said, "Truth does not need decorating." I told him the only repair starts with accountability, and it must be public. Elaine and Paige can admit they skipped the hospital and the funeral. They can apologize without excuses. I told him they can donate their own money to the fund. I told him they can volunteer without cameras for 1 full year. Harold stared at me like I asked for the moon. Then he said that is too much. I nodded, because that answer was the point. I paid for my own coffee, stood up and wished him well. I walked out without opening the door, and the air felt clean. Spring arrived, and the world turned green again, without asking permission. The foundation kept growing, one grant at a time. I expanded our therapist list, and I funded a support group at the hospital. On the first warm Saturday, I drove to the crash intersection on Route 44. I did not go to punish myself. I went to name what happened. I parked, stood on the sidewalk, and watched cars pass too fast. I placed a small bouquet on the grass. I set Captain the Bear beside it for 1 minute. I told Nathan, Grace, and Owen that I miss them, and that I am still here. I told them I am building something that keeps other families standing. I cried, then I breathed, then I drove home. A week later, a woman named Carla Rivera came to the foundation office. Her brother had been killed by a drunk driver, and she had 2 children at home. Our fund paid 2 months of rent and covered therapy for her son. Carla brought a handwritten card, and her hands shook as she thanked me. She said, "You saved us from losing the apartment." She said, "You saved my boy from shutting down." I held the card, and I felt grief and purpose twist together, like a rope. That is when I understood the real inheritance Nathan left me. It was not only money, it was direction. Elaine, Harold, and Paige kept their distance after the diner, and the silence stayed. Sometimes I still wanted a mother, in a soft human way. I stopped confusing desire with safety, and that helped me breathe. Dr. Mariah Shaw asked me what peace looks like now. I told her peace is coming home to a quiet house. I told her it means not dreading a phone call. Peace is doing good work without begging anyone to approve it. Peace is loving people who are gone, without letting the living harm me. That night I wrote 3 letters, 1 to Nathan, 1 to Grace, 1 to Owen. I told them about the garden outside my window. I told them how the sun hits the kitchen table. I told them their names are still spoken with love, not with performance. I sealed the letters, placed them in a box, and I felt steady. My life is smaller now, but it is true, and that is enough. Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, then I read every word twice. I should have shown up that night. I know that now. I am sorry, kiddo. Not because of the article, because I was wrong. It was Harold, my father, and my throat tightened anyway. I saved the message, and I did not reply. Not yet. The next week I brought it to Dr. Mariah Shaw, and I watched her face stay neutral. She asked how it felt, and I told her it felt like a door. Not a door I need to open today, but a door I might one day. Then November 14th returned, a Tuesday again, cold and damp. I drove to the cemetery before work, and the sky looked the same gray. I visited often, on the 1st and the 15th, because routine keeps me steady. But the anniversary hits differently. It pulls air from your chest. I carried sunflowers for Nathan, because he said roses were boring. I carried a small bouquet for Grace, daisies shaped like butterflies. For Owen, I carried a new Captain Bear, because the original is buried with him. I sat on the grass between 3 stones, and I spoke out loud. I told them about the foundation, and the families we kept housed. I told them about counseling sessions we covered, and rent we paid. I told them about a mother in New London who did not lose her apartment. I told Nathan about his letter, and how I read the last line when I shake. Then I whispered that I am trying, and I meant it. I was different that year, not healed, but steadier and less apologetic. Dr. Mariah Shaw told me I am not who I was. I told her, I am who I should have been all along. If you recognize your family in this story, hear me clearly. You are not crazy. You are not dramatic. You are not ungrateful. Grief makes people gentle for a while, but boundaries make people angry. People will say she is still your mother. Blood is thicker than water. People will warn you that you will regret this later. Those people did not stand in a hallway at night, hearing birthday music. They did not watch empty funeral chairs fill with rainwater. I'm not telling you to cut off your parents. That choice is yours. I am telling you your peace is not negotiable. If someone treats your worst day like an inconvenience, you can walk away. So this is where things stand now, and it is simpler than gossip. Harold still texts sometimes, short lines, never demanding, just thinking of you. Once he wrote that he saw a butterfly at the hardware store and thought of Grace. I read every message, and I have not answered yet, but I did not block him. Elaine is still Elaine, and she still recruits strangers to carry her script. Last month, she asked a family friend to call me and to mention her nerves. I recognized the playbook, wished the friend well, and ended the call. Paige sent a letter on plain notebook paper, ink smudged and messy. She wrote that she started therapy, and she is seeing things differently. She said she was not asking for anything. She only wanted me to know. I placed her letter in my nightstand, beside Nathan's letter, and I let it rest there. Forgiveness is not a door I sealed shut, but I will not open it on demand. The foundation is growing, and in the 2nd year, we helped 15 families. Mothers Against Drunk Driving became a full partner, and I testified at the Connecticut State Capitol. I still work nights at Mercy General. I still wear scrubs, and I still clock in. Last week, a little girl came into my emergency room with a fractured wrist. It was routine care, not life-threatening, but she was terrified. She clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest, and she cried the way Owen used to cry. That breathless wail is not only pain, it is fear, and it is wanting safety. I held her good hand while Dr. Patel set the splint. I told her she was brave, and I told her the rabbit was brave too. She blinked through tears and asked if the rabbit could have a bandage. I wrapped gauze around the rabbit paw, and her whole face changed. She smiled so wide it opened something in my chest, then closed it gently. I made it to the supply closet after, and I gave myself 30 seconds. 30 seconds to press my forehead to the shelf, breathe, and let the wave pass. Then I walked back out, finished my shift, and drove home in quiet. Grief does not end. It changes shape, and it keeps showing up. Some days it is a wave that knocks you sideways. Some days it is a whisper. It is always there, and that is okay, because it means I loved them. Nathan left me $5 million, but money was never the inheritance. The real inheritance was the lesson I practice every day, in every hallway. Show up. Not next week. Not when it is convenient. Not after the party. Now, when someone you love is breaking, be there and stay there. If you cannot be there, at least do not pretend you were. I am Emily Foster, an emergency room nurse, a widow, and a mother. I am still standing, not because my family held me up, but because I learned. I learned to hold myself and to protect what matters, and that is my story. 2 days after the rabbit in my emergency room, a plain envelope arrived. It had my name in Paige handwriting, small and careful, like she was afraid. I stared at it for a full minute, then opened it slowly. Paige wrote that she started therapy because she could not sleep anymore. She wrote that the article did not change the truth. It only exposed it. She wrote that she kept replaying my phone call and hearing cake music. She admitted she chose comfort, and she chose attention over my husband and my children. She wrote that she hated herself for that choice, and she did not expect forgiveness. Paige said she was writing because she finally understood that silence is also a decision. She said she wants to be different, even if I never speak to her again. There were no requests for money, no hints, no soft excuses. It was the first thing she ever sent me that did not ask me to fix her feelings. I read it 3 times, then I folded it and put it in my nightstand. In therapy, Dr. Mariah Shaw asked me what I wanted to do with it. I told her I wanted to believe it, but I also wanted to protect myself. She nodded and reminded me that remorse is a start, not a repair. Repair takes time and consistency and accountability without an audience. That night I wrote Paige a short note. Then I did not send it. I wrote that I hear her and I hope therapy helps. I wrote that my boundary still stands and contact will be limited. I wrote that if she ever wants a relationship, she must tell the truth publicly. I tore the note in half and threw it away because I was not ready. Wanting a sister does not mean I owe her access. The following week, Harold sent another text, longer than the last one. He wrote that he could not undo the past, but he could stop hiding. He said he told Elaine that the empty chairs were on him too. He said he should have driven to the hospital himself, and he did not. He wrote that he wants to donate to the foundation and volunteer quietly without being seen. I felt my chest tighten because part of me still wanted a father. Another part of me remembered Harold's voice. Next week, hang on. I showed the message to Robert Calloway, and he said I could accept a donation safely. He also said I should decide what kind of contact I can tolerate. Dr. Mariah Shaw asked me a harder question. She asked whether Harold wants repair or relief. That night I replied with one careful paragraph. I said the foundation is not a bridge back to me, it is a promise to families. I said donations are welcome, but they do not buy proximity. I said if Harold wants repair, he must stop protecting Elaine and Paige. He must tell the truth to anyone who asks, without blaming shock or birthdays. I said he must respect no contact, unless I invite it. Harold answered the next day, and his words were small. He said he will donate, but he cannot confront Elaine. He said she is fragile, and church people are cruel, and I should understand. I read that line twice, and I felt the pattern settle again. Harold still chooses comfort. He just calls it kindness. I did not respond. I forwarded his message to Robert, and Robert handled the donation through the foundation portal. No names attached. If Harold wants to do good, he can do it quietly. If he wants forgiveness, he will need courage, and I cannot lend him mine. People keep asking what I do with the $5 million, like money is the plot. Money is not the plot. Love is the plot, and absence is the twist. Nathan showed up for me in life, and he showed up for me in death. My parents did not show up, then they begged when their image cracked. So here is what I know now, and I will say it plainly. Grief will reveal who you are surrounded by, faster than any celebration. If someone treats your worst day like an inconvenience, you can walk away. You can stop explaining, and you can stop bargaining for basic decency. Boundaries are not revenge. They are a fence around your peace. If you are building a new life after loss, do it slowly, do it safely. Pay off the roof over your head, build an emergency cushion, and ask for therapy. Let good people help you, and let bad people stay outside. The foundation exists because one drunk driver can erase a family in seconds. It exists because rent still comes due, even when you cannot breathe. It exists because healing is expensive, and it should not be a luxury. I am still a nurse in that same hospital, and I still feel waves. Some nights I hear cake music in my memory, and I breathe through it anyway. If this story felt familiar, you are not alone. You can share your story, and you can choose your own limits. I will keep showing up for families who need a hand, and I will keep protecting my own peace. The last thing my family wanted from me was a clean ending for their image. Elaine wanted me to soften the facts, and Harold wanted me to decorate the truth. Paige wanted relief, without paying the full cost of accountability. I refused, because my husband and my children deserve honesty. Nathan, Grace, and Owen are not a lesson someone can borrow, then return when it gets uncomfortable. They are my life, and they are my loss, and they are the reason I learned to stand. The foundation kept growing, quietly and steadily, one family helped at a time. I kept funding therapy sessions, paying rent bridges, and covering funerals when needed. I kept working nights at Mercy General, because I know that hallway, and I know that look in a mother's eyes. Some evenings I still hear cake music in my memory, and my hands still go cold. Then I breathe, and I do the next right thing. I do not answer calls that demand, and I do not attend events that perform. I keep my boundaries simple, and I keep my life honest. If Harold ever finds courage, I will listen, but I will not chase him. If Paige keeps doing the work, I will notice, but I will not reward words alone. Elaine may never change, and I have stopped waiting for that miracle. People tell you family is forever, but they forget a truth. Love is a verb, and it shows up, and it stays. It does not choose convenience while you bury your world. If you are living through loss, and someone treats your pain like an inconvenience, you are allowed. You are allowed to walk away, and you are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to build a life that does not flinch. I am Emily Foster, and I am still here. I miss my family every single day, and I also honor them every single day. Not with a rewritten story, but with a life that shows up.